Hello, kids. Welcome to this presentation. This is going to be covering U.S. presidents, numbers 6 through 10. Real quick review. The first president was indeed George Washington. Second president, John Adams. Third president, Thomas Jefferson. Fourth president, James Madison. Fifth president, James Monroe. So we are going from the time period today from 1825 until 1845. So a period of 20 years. The context is the antebellum America. Ante is before, bellum is war. Obviously that's a reference to the Civil War. So we're going to be roughly covering 20 years of content and a total of 5 presidents. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So the first president we're going to be looking at is John Quincy Adams. He's a Democratic Republican. He is also a one-termer like his dad, by the way. And let's read about his background. John Quincy Adams was the son of John Adams. He spent much of his childhood accompanying his father on trips to France during the American Revolution. As an adult, he entered politics. He was the ambassador to Russia for James Madison. He helped negotiate the end of the War of 1812. This was called the Treaty of Ghent. Later, he became the Secretary of State under James Monroe, and in this position, he helped negotiate the treaty which allowed the United States to purchase Florida from Spain. And I remember saying this in a previous video, Florida was not originally part of the United States. A lot of people look at that side of the country, the East Coast, and they automatically assume that Florida must have been part of that, but no, that was a Spanish holding. So this was the background of John Quincy Adams. His domestic policy, the policy at home. How do we deal with stuff on our home soil? So let's talk about his domestic policy. John Quincy Adams was a supporter of the American system of government. Although the Federalist Party had collapsed, and remember they were the party of big government, many Democrats still wanted the government to support commerce. Many canals were built by the government under John Quincy Adams. Adams strongly disliked slavery. Congress imposed a gag rule which prevented discussion of the topic of slavery. So in other words, Congress had said, hey, we're not going to talk about this. Adams fought to remove this gag rule so that more rights could be given to slaves and more restrictions could be made to the expansion of slavery. So John Quincy Adams, an opponent of slavery, wanted to get rid of the gag rule preventing discussion of what to do as things move forward. His foreign policy. He was what was called a supporter of isolationism, and it sounds just like what it is, someone who wants to stay isolated from the rest of the world, okay? This means that the United States should stay out of foreign problems. As Secretary of State under Monroe, he helped establish the position with treaties and the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine, very important there. He had few foreign problems to deal with as president. And remember, he was a one-termer, 1825 to 1829. Going through my fun little chart here, let's see if we have any fun facts. Well, he's the first president whose father also held the office. He is a supreme figure in American history for human rights. Grew up, obviously, around the American Revolution. When he took his degree from Harvard in 1787, it says that he could write English with one hand while translating into Greek in the other. Just goes to show the importance of the Enlightenment principles and the attempt to reclaim the glories of ancient Greece and Rome. Okay. Yeah, he was the first congressman. He spent 17 years in the House of Representatives. He was the first congressman to assert the rights of government to free slaves in wartime, and Lincoln would base his Emancipation Proclamation on Adams' arguments. So John Quincy Adams, our 6th president. Moving forward to Andrew Jackson of the Democratic Party. Okay, let's talk about his background. Andrew Jackson was captured by the British when he was a boy during the American Revolution. A British officer once ordered him to clean his boots. Jackson refused, and the officer slashed him with his sword. He arose through the ranks of the army to become an officer. He gained fame by winning the Battle of New Orleans at the end of the War of 1812. The war was actually over, and the battle took place after the war had ended. But remember, kids, news travels much more slowly during this time. I think the same things happened during the Civil War. There's people still fighting battles when the war has officially been declared over. So there's the background to our friend Andrew Jackson. His domestic policy. What does he do at home? During the time of Jackson, the Democratic-Republican Party split into the Democratic Party and the Whig Party. Jackson was a Democrat who championed the rights of the common man. During this time of Jacksonian democracy, voting rights were expanded to all white males. He also started the spoils system of governments. Openly elected officials would reward potential donors with political favors. So this is actually a really important and kind of negative thing. Political favors for giving money, the spoils system. And Jackson is actually really well known for this unfortunate thing. He was extremely hostile to the Native Americans. He got Congress to pass the Indian Removal Act of 1830. This led to the relocation of many Native Americans to lands west of the Mississippi River. So Jackson was very hostile to the Native Americans. And as we've seen with some of the other presidents we've looked at, some of them were a little more positive about Native Americans than others. He was certainly on the negative side. Let's talk about his foreign policy. Jackson wanted France to pay the United States reparations for the damages caused during the Napoleonic Wars. France agreed to pay $5 million. However, the payments were stopped in 1834. Jackson threatened to retaliate by restricting trade with France, and France ultimately paid the debt in 1836. Martin Van Buren was Secretary of State under Jackson. He helped open up trade to other countries. I guess this is in a somewhat of a reversal of the position of Quincy Adams. Exports increased by 250% during this time. So the United States is opening itself up a little bit from its isolationist position. All right, so let's talk about Jackson. He was nicknamed Old Hickory. He joined the American Revolution at age 13. He studied law at North Carolina. 2 years later, had his own practice. He was the Attorney General for Tennessee. In 1815, he was commissioned a Major General in the regular army and commanded U.S. forces along the southern coast. Okay. He invaded Spanish Florida, captured Pensacola. He was a huge character. He received the highest number of electoral votes in the 1824 presidential election. He was supposedly the first quote-unquote poor boy to become president, and it says here he championed the common man. His last words on earth would be, "I expect to see you all in heaven, both black and white." Okay. Now, funny part here, it says, although he can be held accountable for the Panic of 1837, a run on the banks, Andrew Jackson managed to have himself immortalized on the $20 bill. That is very true. All right, so moving forward to our eighth president. Our eighth president is Martin Van Buren, also a Democrat. Let's talk about his background. Martin Van Buren was an early supporter of political organizations in New York who used the spoils systems to promote its members. Van Buren was criticized for using his connection with Andrew Jackson to get elected. So Van Buren, as we just heard, is sort of behind this spoils system. He served as vice president during Jackson's second term. He strongly supported Jackson and helped in dealing with some of Jackson's strongest opponents. Jackson's chief rival was Henry Clay. Okay, very interesting. So Martin Van Buren very strongly connected with Andrew Jackson. Let's talk about his domestic policy. Van Buren started his presidency during the Panic of 1837. I just mentioned this. The economy went through a 5-year depression. These hard times made it easy for the opposing Whig Party to gain favor, however. It's usually the case that when a sitting president has something go wrong with the economy, the other political party gets more popular. It's just the way American politics worked. Van Buren continued Jackson's harsh policies against the Native Americans. He carried out the forced relocations of thousands of natives in what became known as the Trail of Tears. He also continued a second war against the Seminole Indians, who resisted this effort. So like Jackson, Van Buren was extremely hostile to the Native Americans. Let's talk about his foreign policy. At the start of Van Buren's presidency, there were Canadians who wanted U.S. support for claiming independence from Britain. Van Buren decided not to support them and remain neutral. La Amistad was a Spanish slave ship that was captured by the U.S. Navy during his presidency. The ship was commanded by slaves who had revolted and freed themselves. Van Buren wanted the ship sent back to Spain. However, the Supreme Court decided to set the men free. So it looks like the Supreme Court got their way. Just another good point about our three systems, our three parts of government. We have the executive branch, the legislative, and the judicial branch. All right, so let's do some fun facts about Martin Van Buren, who, by the way, was also a one-termer, 1837 to 1841. He was president from 1837 to 1841. Fun facts. The first president to be born an American citizen. Okay. He was a smooth talker. Okay. Got elected to the New York State Senate in 1812. 1816, Attorney General. Buren was able to convince Jackson of the so-called spoiled systems that he had championed in New York. So it looks like Van Buren is behind this paying for political favors things. Just months after assuming office, he was confronted with the cataclysmic Panic of 1837, in which 618 banks had closed, and the paralyzing depression that ensued. Urgently called on to create an alternative to the Bank of the United States, Van Buren drafted the Independent Treasury Bill but failed to get it passed until 1840. One of his shortcomings was he was a man not given to quick action, and he tended to think carefully about both sides. He wasn't a bold man. On the issue of slavery, he was supposedly on a middle ground. He supported it in the South but resisted its extension into other territories. Okay. He lost in 1840 in the election to the Whig candidate, William Henry Harrison. And he was actually nominated again in 1848 by a different party, the anti-slavery Free Soil Party, but he was defeated then too. All right, so Van Buren, interesting character. Kind of an underrated president, by the way. I mean, he's a one-termer, but there was a lot of interesting things that happened in his presidency. All right, William Henry Harrison, the Whig Party, the 9th president. All right, so William Harrison made a name for himself as a military leader. He won a key battle against the Native Americans who resisted U.S. westward expansion. This was called the Battle of Tippecanoe. After the battle, Harrison gained the nickname of Tippecanoe. He later used the slogan Tippecanoe and Tyler too to get himself elected president. During the War of 1812, Harrison was put in command of the Army of the Northwest. He won an important victory at the Battle of the Thames. He was later given a gold medal for his service. So it looks like we got a military leader here in William Henry Harrison. Domestic policy. Well, Harrison died after only 30 days into office as president. His illness was possibly caused by the bad weather during his inaugural address. He gave a 2-hour speech during a cold and wet day. It was later concluded that he died of typhoid fever. And again, same thing with foreign policy. Not much to report, as one of my 7th graders famously wrote, because he did not get a chance to become president for more than 30 days. So there's our friend William Harrison. Let me see if there's anything interesting about him here. He was the first president to die in office. Okay. Something else here. In the War of 1812, Harrison served first as a major general of the Kentucky militia, and then as a brigadier general in the Northwest Army. Okay. In 1816, he was elected to the House and then the Ohio Senate and the U.S. Senate. He was nominated in 1836 for the presidency by the Whigs, and he was defeated by Martin Van Buren. That's right, because Buren was president 1837 to 1841. But then he went again, and he did win the presidency. At 68, he was the oldest man elected to the presidency in the 19th century. Okay, it says, exhausted by the political campaign, but too proud to wear an overcoat on the freezing, rainy morning of his inauguration, the seasoned war hero contracted pneumonia and expired in the White House exactly 1 month to the day after swearing in. So, looks like William Henry Harrison had a wonderful military career, but did not last long as president, got sick. All right, let's talk about our 10th president, John Tyler, also of the Whig Party. All right, let's talk about his background. John Tyler was born into a wealthy Virginian family. He entered politics at an early age. He was elected to the House of Representatives and the Senate. He was a strong supporter of states' rights. He initially supported Andrew Jackson. However, he disliked the spoils system and Jackson's use of military power. This caused him to switch over to the Whig Party. He was the first president to come in office through the death of a president. He was vice president to William Harrison, who died 30 days into office. So he was thrown into the job of president. Domestic policy. What was he doing at home? Well, Tyler was not well liked by either political party. No one was expecting him to be president, and people called him the great accidency. His own Whig Party tried to impeach him because he kept vetoing bills, or stopping them, vetoing bills to raise tariffs. Tariffs are taxes on goods traded with foreign countries. So looks like nobody really likes him. Nobody expected him to become president. Let's talk about his foreign policy. He opened up trade with China with the Treaty of Wanhia. I don't know how to pronounce that. I apologize. He also negotiated a treaty with Britain where a border between Maine and Canada was recognized. The Seminole War also came to an end under Tyler. He applied the Monroe Doctrine to the island of Hawaii. Britain was interested in the territory, but Tyler insisted that it was located within the domain of U.S. protection. Remember, with Monroe was the idea that this hemisphere is ours, you guys stay out. And so he was a strong supporter of that Monroe Doctrine. So John Tyler was president from 1841 to 1845. Let's look at some other facts about him. He was the first vice president to ever take the oath of office owing to the death of the incumbent. Okay. Another thing about people not really liking him. He was the valedictorian, or the top student, of the class of 1807 at the College of William and Mary. Interesting. Beautiful campus, by the way, William and Mary. A strict interpreter of the Constitution. Elected governor of Virginia in 1825 and U.S. senator in 1827. He helped draft the Webster-Ashburton Treaty of 1842, which resolved the Maine boundary dispute. I mentioned that. He signed a joint resolution of Congress annexing the slave-holding Republic of Texas. Okay. The sixth of 8 presidents born in Virginia. He remained loyal to his home state when it seceded in 1861. He was elected to the Confederate Congress but died before it ever convened. So very interesting. This was an interesting fact for me that looks like Texas joined the Union under John Tyler. I'm a native Texan. All right, kids. So we have looked at 5 presidents over the years from 1825 to 1845. We've talked a little bit about their backgrounds. We've talked about their domestic policy. We've talked about their foreign policy. Follow-up activities. The follow-up is the same as what we've been doing. Do your very best to fill out the president form here. And what I like to do is have some fun with this because, yes, there's a lot of information I've shared, but what you can also do is write down some of the fun fact stuff too, because that's what makes history come alive. The fun facts really sort of help you remember what's going on with these presidents. And what we're doing is we're not just tracking the history of the presidents, we're looking at the United States history through the lens of the careers of these presidents. I know we are painting with very broad strokes here, but the point of an elementary education is to, in fact, get those broad strokes so that at some point later we can disagree with and argue more about them. So thank you all for attending this presentation. This has been U.S. Presidents 6 through 10. Thank you all for listening. Have a great day.